We are drowning in a sea of information. Every day, we consume the equivalent of 174 newspapers worth of content. That's 5 times more than we did just 30 years ago. But our brains haven't evolved to process this flood of data. 500 million tweets, 4 billion Facebook posts, and 720,000 hours of YouTube content are created every single day. We would assume that all this information would be valuable to us. But the reality is, we are losing our grip on truth. But wait, what is truth? Before we get too subjective and philosophical, there's actually a whole field of study around it. It's called epistemology, which is a study of how we know what we know. Specifically, it is the study of what distinguishes opinion from justified belief. What if I told you that the way we understand truth itself has a history, a system that has been carefully constructed over centuries, and that system lies beneath all of the incredible technological progress we have made over the last 200 years? The problem is, for those who have been born into it, that system is invisible to us. To quote David Foster Wallace, the most obvious, important realities are often the ones hardest to see and talk about. It's the water we've been swimming in since birth. That system, it has enemies. There's a group of people who are trying in secret to break it down, to undermine it, and make it so you can't tell what is real. Now, this sounds like a conspiracy, and it kinda is. I'm gonna tell you exactly how the system works and who is behind the shared breakdown of reality. My name is Tobias. I spent the last 7 years studying information systems. I interviewed dozens of people, I read a lot of books, and I wrote this book about how technology changes our perception of reality. It brought me to one thinker seeking to answer a question. When do we stop agreeing about what is real?
My name is Jonathan. Last name is Rauch. I'm a journalist by profession, but kind of an unusual journalist because I cross over into academic exploits like epistemology. No one told me I couldn't, so I did.
Rauch is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he wrote a book called The Constitution of Knowledge. The book is a history lesson and an unpacking of how we turn information, which we have a lot of, into knowledge, which is in short supply. Rauch's research, going back through some of history's darkest inflection points, outlines a pattern that every human society, every large nation, every small tribe needs good processes for resolving disagreements about reality.
Otherwise, they schism, they become oppressive, they get out of touch with reality, and they fail. And this turns out to be a very difficult problem.
Different societies have different ways of resolving these disagreements. Some highly religious or authoritarian societies do it by force. Democracies do it with open debate. Let's back up a moment. In the 1600s, there were major wars that spread throughout Europe, the result of a new information technology coming on the scene, the printing press. It made it possible for common people to read the Bible for the very first time. What they read was, well, bad for the Catholic Church. The result was enormous wars between groups of people who had different views on truth. These were wars of religion, but they could have just been called wars of reality. Literally millions of people were killed.
Wholesale slaughter. Something like 30% of the population of what is now Germany was killed in these disputes. Protestants versus Catholics and Protestants versus Protestants ripped the continent of Europe apart.
Around this time, there was a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes who looked around and basically said, "This is bad. We need someone to get a handle on it." He famously wrote, "The natural state of man is a war all against all, where life is nasty, brutish, and short. Without an all-powerful central authority with a monopoly on violence and truth, you end up with a teeming mass of people trying to dominate others." He called this absolute ruler a Leviathan. The basic equation is this: we as humans need to give up our freedoms to ensure our safety. When stuff gets scary, we need a strong man or a woman to take control. But one of Hobbes' contemporaries strongly disagreed with this.
Some people came along and looked at this and said there has to be a better way. If there's a founding father of the Constitution of Knowledge, it's the philosopher John Locke.
He said no, human nature was not defined simply by desire for power or safety, but wait for it, freedom and reason. Locke believed human rights and knowledge came not from authority, but from examination. You understand reality by testing ideas against evidence. He called this empiricism.
And who also develops what we call liberalism, the political philosophy of decentralized, open-ended processes where everyone gets to participate and their basic rights that need to be observed.
There's a crucial connection here between reason and self-governance. Reason allows us to resolve conflicts using evidence. The other way is with tribal affinity, using violence. Much later, the philosopher Karl Popper would essentially call this killing our ideas instead of each other.
At the same time as Locke, you get the emergence of a group of people we now call, in hindsight, scientists. They begin pioneering actually doing what the philosophers are writing about, which is experimental science, creating networks in which they have structured critical conversations, demanding that they use demonstrations that anyone can replicate. This becomes, over the succeeding 3 centuries, liberal science, or the reality-based community.
But whose reality? I think that there is a sense right now, a seeding of reality as being knowable. What would you say to people that might assume that, reality, capital R reality, it's not really knowable?
I would say that truth is never perfectly knowable, yet objective knowledge is something that it is possible to obtain, and that we have obtained a whole lot of it. In fact, objective knowledge is humanity's greatest creation. The system that produces it, the constitution of knowledge, is a species-transforming technology. It allows us to create vast networks of millions of professionals in all kinds of disciplines around the world, communicating to check each other, look for each other's errors, float new hypotheses, check them at a fantastic rate.
Jonathan is talking about something critical here. A system that assumes we're wrong before we're right.
This is a radical proposition that we get knowledge not from certainty, but from doubt. The thing about science isn't that it doesn't make mistakes, it's that it makes mistakes very quickly. And the same is largely true of journalism. By doing this, it creates knowledge at a rate that is astounding. On any given morning, humanity today creates more new objective knowledge than all human beings did in their first 200,000 years. This is an extraordinary thing, and it works on the premise that we never do have perfect grasp of truth.
Okay, imagine this as a giant funnel, a big filtration system. At the top, an ocean of information pours in. Ideas, claims, theories, and arguments. All of this raw material represents the potential for knowledge, but much of it is garbage. Much of it is biased or completely false. As information flows through this giant network, it undergoes layers of scrutiny and validation. Peer review, fact-checking, open debate and criticism. Ideas are challenged and tested through arguments based on evidence. This is designed to filter out our errors, our biases, and our worst judgment.
By constantly looking for error, by constantly checking each other, by pitting my biases against your biases, I can't see mine, you can't see yours, but on a good day I can see yours and you can see mine, and forcing us into contention and comparison allows us to develop knowledge.
This creates a network of billions of people processing information more powerful than any computer. Rauch calls this the reality-based community. The institutions committed to the rules and norms of the constitution of knowledge. There are 4 institutions. The biggest is science, academia, research, medicine, and the like. Number 2 is journalism. Number 3 is the legal system.
And number 4 is government, which has to be based in reality, or not to be capricious, arbitrary, and oppressive.
This is the reality-based community. It's not perfect, but it's better than the messy and confused waterways of the open sea. Here you find knowledge. There you find only information. So how do you know which is which? When you are here, you float adrift, unable to see who is telling you the truth. Both the media establishment, pundits, social media, and the influencers you trust are all saying something different. Who is right? Who is wrong? Who is lying? You've become unmoored from the constitution of knowledge. So why is the system under attack? If it helps so many people, why would it be undermined? The answer is power.
So, constitution of knowledge has enemies. It has since day one. Through a lot of history, a lot of that opposition has taken the form of outright repression. Governments saying, you can't say that, you can't publish that, we'll put you in jail or exile or even kill you. if you do. In America, that's hard to do, but some people figured out a way to do it. And that's a technique which has been called Firehose of Falsehood. It's a Russian style of mass disinformation. It's the opposite of censorship. Your goal is to deceive people, but people are hard to deceive. What you think you can do, even if you can't deceive them, is disorient them, distract them, confuse them, divide them, and ultimately make them so uncertain that anything is true that they just throw up their hands and walk away. They say it's all a pack of lies. You can't believe anything you read or see.
Rauch is describing something key here: gaslighting, a social manipulation tactic, obscuring the truth so that you don't know who to trust.
You do this by swamping every information channel with so many lies, exaggerations, half-truths, and conspiracy theories that no one can keep up with them. You don't care how ludicrous they are. You don't care if they conflict with each other. You just want to create a constant buzz of confusion, and you want to leave all the fact checkers far in the dust so that by the time they've knocked down one of these things, you put up 5 more.
There's something that happens when you are exposed to this much information, this many conflicting narratives, in which doubt becomes this ambient field around everything that you observe.
Once you get them in this state of demoralization, they won't oppose you. And that's the condition that you want them to be in politically. That gives you a lot of power. This is why Putin fills the air with lies about Ukraine. They're a bunch of Nazis. The Russians threw out 10 or 12 different false explanations. They just throw them out there in almost a carnivalesque way to turn the whole idea of truth into a sham. This is effective. It is intentional. It succeeds in making people cynical, making them doubt the very possibility of truth.
Now, if you've been hearing an undertone in this conversation, that of a conspiracy, it's because this is the actual definition of a conspiracy: a secret plan by a group to do something illegal. And in this context, one particular strategist stands above the rest.
As Stephen Bannon famously said, the media is the enemy and we know how to deal with them. We flood the zone with shit. That's a precisely accurate description of the firehose of falsehood. You so pollute the epistemic environment that people don't know where to turn anymore for truth.
Why do we know Steve Bannon? He's best known as the chief strategist for Donald Trump.
Possibly the most dangerous in an American context is Donald Trump and his MAGA movement. Beginning in 2016 and then accelerating, we have seen the use of Russian-style mass disinformation tactics in American politics on a scale and with a success entirely without precedent. The closest I can come to finding anything like it in the U.S. was the Southern campaign before the Civil War to manipulate the information environment, to make it seem like a majority of Southerners wanted to secede. They never did, but propaganda was used to that effect. In case you don't know your history, that ended rather badly.
Now, this is where things get weird, because when propaganda starts to win, everything seems like propaganda.
But they can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news.
It's a creepy, corrupt business, and the media, to a large extent, acts as a propaganda arm for the Democratic Party.
It's not even believable.
And they like the very fine people hoax, the Russiagate hoax, all these different things that they've done. They tried to pin on you. It's a clear distortion.
Some confusion here. The media does deserve criticism. They are prone to failures of proportionality. The core business model of journalism requires attention to operate, and mispackaging information out of context is an easy way to make a story. But it's not necessarily on purpose, and it's not the same as lying. So news organizations have a difficult job. They need to balance what is interesting with what is true. And in that process, they engage sometimes with sensationalism. Problem is, much of the time they don't know they're being sensational. They're just misinterpreting information. Don't worry, you do it too. It comes down to threats. Imagine your brain as a mixing station with 2 inputs: raw experience and existing beliefs. Usually, when you encounter new evidence that challenges what you believe, you adjust your views slightly. But sometimes a belief becomes so strong, so emotional, or so traumatic that it clouds this new evidence. Say a person has a traumatic experience with a dog when they're a kid, sees a friendly puppy, and interprets its tail wagging as a threat. Instead of this happy puppy weakening their fear, it actually strengthens it. This is called a trapped prior. When your existing beliefs become so powerful, it transforms new information, even contradictory evidence, into confirmation of what you already thought. Journalists are prone to this too. They see something and they interpret it as a dog whistle. To their sensitive or overvigilant ears, they call it evidence of a plot or a hidden affront. Elon Musk's hat, for instance, becomes a Nazi font face. Some boy's smirk becomes an abusive interaction with a Native American elder. None of these are true. Trapped priors got in the way of good judgment. But that is not an attempt at deception. What's important is that the journalist and the publisher have reputations on the line. If they get it wrong, another news organization is jealously waiting to call them out on it. Triggered people do crazy things, and Trump does nothing if not trigger the media. It's a great way to get free attention, which is actually part of the point. If you want your political opposition to look crazy, do something that can be interpreted in this murky way. A trend towards sensationalism that you can definitely see and sense from any news source, if we're talking about kind of correctly hewing to the contours of reality, that's not perfect, right?
It is the case that legacy media screws up, and we all have our pet examples. The question is, what do you do if you're a news organization and you discover that something that you reported was wrong? Do you correct it or at least stop saying it? CNN, a while back, ran a story that proved to be false, that alleged something to do with Donald Trump and ties to Russian money. The result is that CNN fired 4 staffers whose its internal investigation found were not sufficiently rigorous in checking the facts. They were prominent people in the organization. That's a very different behavior than a news organization which, when it finds that something is inaccurate, doubles down on it and promotes it even more because that's what people want to hear. These are 2 fundamentally different epistemic models. Pointing to the first model, the model that cares about accuracy and saying it makes mistakes, is not the same as pointing to the second model and saying, well, it makes mistakes too. These organizations are in 2 entirely different businesses.
We are in a war for reality. It's a cold war, but it could soon be hot. The same dynamics are playing out across social media. People are girding for a fight. So what can we remember about the constitution of knowledge? No one gets to declare truth alone. Look for reputations. Reputations matter. Most journalistic institutions will spend time issuing corrections when they are wrong. They will do soul searching, institutionally and individually, when they make mistakes. It's a fundamental difference between journalism and propaganda. When someone says they are always right, they are not.